Guys, you can unmute yourself anytime during the session, and probably you can also ask questions if you have anything. Yeah, for that part. Okay, there's no restrictions of that you cannot ask questions or anything. Okay. Can you see my screen now, guys?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. So, welcome everyone for this DevSecOps, internship program, cybersecurity internship program. The last 2 weeks, we have been talking about quite a few things, but the fundamentals, right? The first week, we spoke about what is security, what do you mean by cybersecurity, what are the different concepts that we should need to look into that. Those are the things we came into play. It is in the second week, we were focusing more from a career perspective. What are the different roles that are present out there? And one of the roles that is very critical in today's is penetration testing. And we also saw how emergence of artificial intelligence is actually having a huge impact on how pen testing has been performed out there. All right, pen testing predominantly is speaking about ethical hacking. Right, we're actually taking that web application or whatever is there and trying to hack into that and trying to compromise all those things that we are able to do all those things out there. And we saw what are the responsibilities and roles and responsibilities it's going to be there. But one more particular job role that we are seeing it is, the demand for this particular role is increasing significantly. More companies are moving towards cybersecurity, and for development team who are moving towards DevOps, they're also moving towards a particular role called DevSecOps, right? So in this lecture today, we'll see about what do you mean by DevOps, right? Why there's a need for a DevOps, okay? And what are the issues with the DevOps operations from a security perspective? What are the challenges we are facing out there? And we look into that and we'll see how DevSecOps plays a very important role in bringing the security or increasing the security for us. Okay, DevSecOps is very important. It has a huge impact on the way things carries out. We will look into that, right? And why probably we'll also look into them from a career perspective. What is your job roles and things when you go into the DevSecOps roles out there, right? Let's dive into this, right? So, one second. So next week, we'll be talking about cloud security. If you have attended our previous sessions in cloud security, probably we'll be adding more content into that in the next week and something more relevant into that. Yeah. So please look out, please join next week as well. So this is the current third week and we'll be looking into DevSecOps. So what do you mean by DevOps? Before going into DevSecOps, because without DevOps, there'll be no DevSecOps, right? Same thing is going to be there. So what do you mean by DevOps? DevOps can be explained as a people working together to conceive, build, and deliver software, secure software at top speed. DevOps particularly enables software development and operations teams to accelerate delivery throughout automation, collaboration, fast feedback, and iterative movements, right? And stemming from agile approach to software development, a DevOps process expands a cross-functional approach of building and shipping application in a faster and more iterative manner, right? So I read through this. This is actually what we call as a definition of DevOps. But what happens in real time, right? What happens in real time? How is this particular DevOps came into play? So traditionally, we have to see DevOps has been there is not much for not long out there. I think if you actually go and check out number of people who are having more than 7 to 8 years experience, hands-on experience in DevOps will be very less. There may be people with 15, 20 years experience who are working in DevOps, but they wouldn't have worked in DevOps for the last 15, 20 years, right? A DevOps in terms of IT lifecycle, it is a fairly new uh, architecture, but why it came into existence, right? What was the need for that? So there are multiple reasons that comes into play. DevOps is not a set of steps, all right, not a set particular, it is not inclined to a particular technology. It, in a way, we can tell it, it is a way of software development, way of life and certain approaches to them. So it is not mandatory to have a CI/CD pipeline, but it is not mandatory to have a Docker's containers or anything. Meaning we do, it is important to use these tools, but the conceptual perspective, it is not that part, right? So we need to understand what DevOps came into existence. So earlier, there was something called as a software development lifecycle model that was used for waterfall model. During this time, right, if you take 15, 20 years back, there were very little small applications, and there were also the development rate was very limited, right? Today, if you see, the regularly used website keeps on changing quite constantly based on the season and what are the other requirements, business requirements. But in earlier times, we saw the software development or applications were used for core applications like banking, financial sectors, insurance. And in those situations, the requirements for the application remain constant, right? So meaning requirements can be anything. I need a screen, I need it to calculate. Let's say if you're having a bank cashier application of that, right? It's a simple, right? One of the components of banking is cashier. So that person has to log in, the cashier has to log in. When someone submits a check or some other documentation to receive the cash, he's supposed to verify that. Once that is verified, he's supposed to update in the database that particular amount was withdrawn from this particular account. And after he gets in status for that, and then he can give the cash to that person out there. So this is the requirement. During the waterfall model, what used to happen is that we used to not get a lot of requirements, meaning they used to take the requirements first, then they used to design the application, then write the code for that, and then going to test the application for that. Right, once everything goes fine, they're going to distribute, then they're going to launch their application, or we can tell in an IT terms, put it into production environment, right? But this entire process, what happens is that it takes about on an average between 4 to 6 months, or sometimes even more than that. Sometimes even more than that. But this is totally fine. And I mean, for me, a lot of people tell is that this particular model is waste or not useful, and that particular model is better and things like that. For me, there is no bad model. It is just that we have to choose the right model for the situation, right? So even if you take in the automobile, there will be no bad car or right car out there. The concept was right. And a sports car may be good when you're driving in the racetrack or on the highway, but when it comes to in your farming things, and the tractor makes more sense, right? Or large tractors makes more sense out there. So we just need to understand which is the right tool for that. And when you saw, right around 2000 and after that, there was slowly started, people started buying things online, and the social interaction over, internet grew significantly, right? Nowadays, we do almost everything. You can look at the calendar, you can set up your mail, and everything is going to be online out there. So now what happened was, because of this rapid growth, right, the requirement keeps on changing, right? Let's say think about an Amazon website, right? You have, based on the season, or based on the, let's say if you take it up in India, it is always going to change based on the season, festival and things like that. And sometimes even based on the what is supposed to be displayed, it is constantly changing based on the that particular user interest. Sometimes it is going to be based on the particular local traditions. It is going to make modifications to search results and everything. So there's a constant change of requirements. If we go with a traditional approach, right, when you take a large set of requirements and then you try to finish it in 6 months time, by the time the product comes into play, the requirement is no longer valid, right? Let's say if we are doing something in a Christmas time, in the December month, the amount of sales and the amount of offers they're providing, the look and feel of the application is supposed to be good out there. If something goes wrong, it's in there. If it goes, the deadline goes beyond a month, right? It does not make sense at all. Here, not only the coding is going to be affected, the business is going to be affected significantly. The loss from a business perspective will be very high, right? So they had to move away from a waterfall model because they assumed, they started feeling by the time they finished the requirements, it was going to be very difficult. Okay, so then they came into agile methodology where it was reduced. What they told was, instead of taking 20 or 40 or 50 requirements, let's take 4 to 5 requirements, try to work on it. And based on how the feedback we're getting from the client, probably we can make modification or add requirements to that. And this is basically, it will go on for a 30-day or a 15-day process. And the failure or problems in the product was identified much earlier. Yeah. So now the issue here was, still there was the time taken was more. The main reason is the testing team, the development team were not interacting out here, right? And that is where it came into an issue of that. So they wanted to reduce this time. And this is when the cloud started coming into play. And the virtualization technology all came into play, and the synergy of it, when we're using a lot of tools and the way we are using it, is what makes DevOps, right? Previously, if you are having a development server, one would be running on Windows, one would be running on Linux, and one would be running on Windows Server 2022 or something like that. So the way the code used to behave in each of the phases was different. And when it goes into production, again, you had to make some modifications out there. It was not a smooth operation. But when it comes, we got virtualization and Docker containers, all the people could be using a similar image and they could have no issues with that, and reduces the impact, business impact as well. So now DevOps, people started using DevOps, right? And again, a lot of things could be automated in DevOps. The CI/CD pipeline is what? It's just that, trying to automate the process. Let's say if you want to get one code to production, right? Code to production, you have to manually build the Docker container, then push it to get the code from GitHub, then build the container, then push that to Docker Hub, then push it to production. All those things is going to be repeated task, and human time, it is always going to be very expensive. The technical amount, your salaries, the operations cost, people don't really know, can be significant, right? So when you automate it, two things you are reducing. The human error factor is also removed. At the same time wasted by a human on doing the day-to-day activities is also removed out here. So that is where DevOps came into play. But there are certain restrictions with the DevOps. Right. So what are those restrictions when it comes to security challenges? Right. The problem was in the we have to check out the speed was a security, because if we increase the speed of development phase and things, somewhere down the line we are reducing the security, and if you're increasing the security, the speed is going to be compromised, right? See here in this situation, there are different phases of security, right? One is the code analysis, one is the running a dynamic assessment testing, static assessment testing, then looking at a lot of other things, and pen testing as well. So during this phase, the DevOps has to stop and they have to go with that process, right? So now if you remove this to increase the speed, the security is going to be compromised, right? That is one issue. Automation of vulnerability detection is a major issue, right? Because as I told, every time there is an change, it is mandatory requirement to check for security issues, right? So there are times when you are pen testing, we look at the client every time, we go back to them and tell any changes they make, they come to us and ask us to pen test the application once again for at least for the features that has been added. And we check there is in the new feature, there is no new bugs introduced. So this is, you have to consider here is that I've already tested the application. I've already told that application is secure. All the bugs are fixed. But it does not mean that it is all the bugs will remain fixed, because as a developer keep on making changes to that, in the new changes, it is a very possibility that a new vulnerabilities could be introduced. Not only that, if you're using a particular operating system for running a website, it is also possible this one website, this operating system could have new vulnerabilities introduced, right? So it is also have to check out for this thing. So how do we automate this, right? And how do we integrate security integration, right? How do we? Because it is when we look into DevOps, the tool set, right? Whenever there's a particular course, we are usually talking about 4 to 5 different tool sets out there. But in reality, the amount of tool sets that are available out there, it's huge, right? How do we make sure that which tool is important, which tool is right, and then how we are going to understand which, how do we integrate these tools with our cybersecurity, right? So that is very much important on that. Right. So one more major problem is insufficient security skills, right? One of the reasons, why we'll see later that there is a huge demand for cybersecurity roles in today, even when there is a lot of downsizing is happening. We are not seeing security teams being cut because they're already being stretched out, right? It is very difficult to get a good quality cybersecurity engineers into the team out there. And there was a situation when there was a 1:1,000 ratio difference between the developers and pen testers, meaning in the early stages, if for every 1,000 developers, there was only one pen tester. So amount of projects a pen tester could work was limited, and it became a huge issue, right? And it is not easy to upskill someone into security. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of issues that comes into play as well, right? One more thing is cultural shift. What do you mean by cultural shift here? Right. So what do you mean by cultural shift? Think about today we are talking about a lot about security, right? And I'll tell you most of the time when we're working with developers, they prefer, there's a reluctance towards working on security. The main reason being is that uh, they have to redo a lot of things. They have to redesign or anything, and their approach is going to be completely changed. Especially when we talk about senior developers who have been working in the industry, the way they approach, way they design the code is for the application to be performed exceptionally well under the whatever the circumstances that is going to be there, right? And the way their design approach is completely different. But when we put security into the design scenario, it changes, right? So for instance, think about someone, right? Think about someone who has been driving the car for a long time and has not been using seat belts. And all of a sudden we come and tell him that they have to use not only normal seat belts, probably a racing seat belts, which has much more number of belts out there. And we are going to probably ask him to wear an helmet and a fireproof jacket as well while driving the car, right? So for his own security, we're going to put that, but it is going to significantly affect his performance because he's not able to adapt to the new process, right? So this is what also some of the things we have to, the problems they face in DevOps as well, right? And technical depth is also one thing. When we're talking about integrating tools into DevSecOps, when we talk about understanding this DevSecOps rules, security tools gives out a lot of reports and stuff out there, right? And we need to have the technical depth to understand what exactly it is going to be. And it is going to be very difficult for developers to understand, or the team, whichever is the operations team also are going to have issues, right? People are running servers and things and all. Whenever we are pen testing, about 50 to 60% of the cases, if the development team is new to security, they have not worked with us previously, almost certainly we have to sit with them and explain what that particular vulnerability it is and why it is important to fix it and what is the critical level that is going to be there. We have to tell them which is a priority, which there will be multiple bugs out there, right? Multiple vulnerabilities. We have to tell them which is the priority. They have to understand those things. So again, there is a lack of technical depth. Okay. So how do we overcome the security challenges, right? How do we overcome the security challenges? First thing, incorporate security from the earlier stage of development cycle, thus reducing the chances of late stage vulnerabilities. Think about, there was one application, okay. What happened was there was a gaming website. They were using cryptocurrency for for betting and things like in that company, in that website, and they launched, right. Within the first half an hour, they lost around $40,000 and they shut up the website. Right. So and they came to us, that something is wrong. We are losing money. I don't know where it's happening. And we are seeing the couple of players are winning on every move. And that should not supposed to happen out there. Meaning, if you're having a roulette or if you're telling choose one of the doors and a lot of other arcade based games, the chances of winning every single time is going to be less. And they also saw that it is very fast, within a minute they're winning 3 times or something like they were suspicious about it. And they came to us, So we analyzed it and we gave them there's a problem here. The problem here was complete redesigning was required. The way they have set up the application, there was no mitigation. There was no patch or fix that could be done temporarily so that they have the time for through that part, right? So they had to shut down their website completely, and they actually kind of went out of business for a couple of months. And when they relaunched after redesigning the application, they had lost the user base. They had to redo a lot of things because they had taken months to build that user base, and the user lost trust into that. And this happened because they never thought about security, and they only thought about security after the application was developed. Okay, so that's the major issue. So it is important to shift left, meaning try to implement security at an earlier stage. I'm talking about during the design phase itself, during the requirement phase itself. So you need to collect information about that, right? That is very much important, right? So we have to tell, okay, if there's a login page, what should be the password length? Setting a password length is important, and that is also security consideration, right? After how many failed attempts the user is supposed to be logged, that is also a security consideration, right? And how often you're supposed to change your password, that is also security consideration. There are a lot of other technical things that we need to look just for the login page and forgot password page. I think there are about 20 different security measures that need to be put into place for that to happen. Right. So it keeps on changing based on the application. A lot of things that comes into play. Right. That is important. During the design phase only we implement it. Even the developers will be reluctant because it changes that the coding process and things. When you have it in the design phase and the requirement phase itself, they will build application based on that, and it will be a better application. Right. The performance in terms of how it's going to function, it will be much more reliable because you're not making changes to cover up bugs at a later stage. You're resolving the bugs at an earlier stage itself. Right. Second point is that security as a code. Right. Implementing security as code itself, enabling automatic enforcement of security policy. It can be in multiple ways. One thing is looking at the source code itself, checking out is there any issues at the source code level, some problem is there. Looking at the configurations at an earlier stage itself, and there should be some kind of an automatic enforcement. This should be there. Without doing this, we cannot go further. Right? That is the thing about security policies also. Right? And continuous security. Integrate continuous security monitoring testing into the DevOps pipeline. So you might have seen if you have attended DevSecOps class, DevOps pipeline is a continuous approach, right? So you're going to get the code, you're going to build the application, then you're going to launch the application, and that keeps on changing every time when there's a modification that is going to be there. At the same time, there's also tools like Prometheus and things like that which help us monitor the DevOps pipeline health on a continuous way. Similarly, we need to implement some kind of a security measure where it will monitor the security of those devices here as well, right? So is it any attack is being done? Is DOS attack is being done on it? Or is there any kind of an WAF enabled it? What's the logs coming out of it? And we need to have the testing also to be done in a very regular way, right? Consistently look into that part. That is what we have to take into consideration. Training and awareness, equipping your team with necessary security skill awareness, right? Fostering culture of safe security, shared security responsibilities. And this is something very important that we don't give a lot of importance to, right? We see when we talk about security training awareness with our clients, what they would ask us is to give us a basic security awareness program, right? They think talking about what is a phishing attack. So what do you mean by other types of on a regular day, what a normal user or a normal person is subjected to, right? It could be password, it could be HTTPS and things like that. They talk about that and they want to continue with that process. And that is excellent. That is a mandatory requirement for everyone in the company. But when it comes to your technical team, there should be much more specialized training in cybersecurity for this specific teams as well, right? So we do reach out to the customers and tell them, see, for the developers, you need to understand, we need to show them what is a web application pen testing. You need to take up these courses, understand, give them, right, make them understand how does an hacker get into their application? What are the measures they can be put out there? Because once they understand that part, they'll be able to better protect the application. Similarly, for operations teams, we can tell how the operating systems are configured or services are configured. If it is done in an insecure way, how it will give access to the hacker out there. And we have to look into that part as well, giving training them in. Giving in web application hacking training for operations teams makes less sense because they never work on it, but giving them security training on how to harden, the Linux or the services, hardening meaning how to make it more secure. So making it harder so it does not break, right? So it has to be customized that we need to look into place of that, right? So let's talk about, say,
So, Karthik,
yes.
sorry, there was a question from Priyam saying, what
Okay.
is security as a code? Is it fixing bugs in a software application?
Yes, security as a security, the code itself. So meaning you can talk about software, secure code analytics that comes into play. SonarQube or Fortinet is one of the tools that can be used. It will check for any security vulnerabilities in the code level itself. Okay, so we can tell that, okay, this code is having some vulnerability. Let's not put it to production or into deployment. Let's come back and fix this code and then continue with that part. So these tools will be able to identify is there any security
Oh,
issues. Yes. Yeah. I hope that was clear. You want any more clarification, guys? Any more questions? Devisha, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Anyone else is having any more questions, guys?
Okay, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions if you wanted to ask.
Sir, Mirza here.
Yes,
So I
Mr.
have a question related to what type of security. So I mean, do we have any more scope in the job as compared to the job market here, like network security or cloud security or any application security or
Yes, so I'll talk about it at the later stage, but to be specifying, DevSecOps comes with a lot of things into that part, right? So one of the things that it does not cover is the network security, right? Basically, if you're going with network security, there you're talking about firewalls. It is predominantly, you'll see, if you're wanting to get into network security, it is predominantly firewalls and VPN management. And how do you troubleshoot all those things, right? And this is probably where network operations team comes into play. Most commonly used firewall or the preferred certification, what we are seeing from a firewall perspective is going to be Palo Alto, right? You need to focus on networking Cisco certifications, and that the knowledge base is going to be more into that. Predominantly, if you see cybersecurity roles broadly, we can be seen here is one is malware analysis that is going to be there done internally. And second thing is SOC operations, which are quite easily available. And the entry requirement for them is bit less. But again, the salaries are also going to be on a lower end itself for those things because the skill set required for that is not that stringent. When we talk about network security, it again, they are also having good packages and it is difficult to get the certifications and the stringentness of application processing or hiring is bit high because your network infrastructure is going to be dependent on your skill set, the organization network infrastructure. Let's say if you've not configured the firewall properly, the entire network may go down, you know, so that is there. But once where we are seeing, in both the network security, experience makes into a lot of importance of that. The more experience is required to get into good projects. And again, it takes a bit of time to understand those things. And next role is going to be pen testing role, right? So it basically is about hacking into applications. This is particular role, right? The knowledge is given more importance and the entry requirement is not as stringent because it is very difficult to find good candidates in penetration testing out there, right? Again, there's a specialization in this. Some people are infrastructure pen testing. They're more into hacking operating systems, networks, and things like that. So they'll have a bit better knowledge about how voice and infrastructure works. And again, the most common job openings in pen testing is going to be web and mobile app hacking, not mobile hacking, mobile app. How do you compromise an app in your mobile and websites as well? That is where it is going to be there. So these were the traditional time, job roles that were there. So nowadays, when we talk about DevSecOps, you are doing much more into that. You're doing pen testing, you're doing a role of a security architect, a lot of things that comes into play, right? And that is what we are going to discuss later. I'll talk about it, you know. So in terms of career perspective, there's a lot of demand for DevSecOps at the moment. Uh, Pen testing, they're asking along with DevSecOps. There are a lot of roles. What they tell is that I know you can do the pipeline, but can you hack that application in the as well? Because what happens is that every time these applications are mandatory requirement that they are hacked by an external entity, right? So they need to go to a consulting company and they will hack that application and give a certificate for them. That is important. But if they wait for that, they are going to get a huge pile of vulnerabilities that can be difficult to fix it. So what the companies or organizations are looking at to have someone internally who is going to work on that project, who is going to test that application for security issues, and so that when it actually goes out for pen testing by an external entity, they are going to find because they are going to be very much skilled into that. But instead of finding like 30, 40 vulnerabilities, it can become brought down to 3 to 4, and that will be quite easy to fix. 30, 40 will take a long time to fix out that, and that we have seen. that works out there. So all those things, your DevSecOps helps you with identifying these bugs and fixing it. And that is what we'll see. And that is where we are seeing, right? A lot of companies, if you go pen testing, it's predominantly consulting approach, but DevSecOps is where large organizations, any big companies, Amazon or anyone, they're looking. So in fact, actually, the DevOps team are getting trained or being pushed to understand DevSecOps so that they can implement the security operations in the CI/CD pipeline. Hopefully it was, any more questions? Okay. So let's continue. So as we spoke earlier, software development lifecycle, predominantly what is going to happen is that the design, code, test, deploy, and finally we were doing the security testing, right? This is going to be an issue, right? The more earlier you identify, the less cost it is going to be, right? If you identify at the earlier stage itself, at the design stage itself, I think there was some study conducted very long time back. I don't think so the numbers will be relevant now. So they told like if the security vulnerability is identified at the design stage, it will cost a company $5. At the coding stage, it is identified, it will cost them $50. During testing, it will cost around $15,000. And if it is done at the production stage, when the application is launched and people are using, it may cost around $50,000 on an average, right? So this was I think it's about 10 years back number. At that time only for 50,000 was launched. But let's say if it is not identified at all and an hacker finds it, the cost cannot be quantified, right? Cost cannot be quantified. It can have a huge impact. There